This video will cover the Geometry Regents exam from June 2015, questions 1 through 7. Number 1 says quadrilateral ABCD undergoes a transformation, producing quadrilateral A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime. For which transformation would the area of A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime not be equal to the area of the original? So when we think about transformations, some of them preserve distance and others do not. The one that does not preserve distance is a dilation, which means it's not a rigid motion. There are some test questions that ask if it's a rigid motion or not, or which of the following is not a rigid motion. Sometimes test questions will also ask you, using the properties of rigid motions, determine why the two triangles are congruent. So it's important to understand that we do not preserve distance, which means it's not a rigid motion, and we're looking for something that's talking about dilation, because then, in that case, the areas would not be equal. A rotation, if you think about that, is a turn. If you just simply turn a triangle or a quadrilateral in this case, you still end up with the same size. A reflection is a flip. If you flip it over an axis or a line, then it's, again, still the same size. Dilation is that shrink or grow, which means size changes, which means that the areas would not be equal. So I'm going to choose choice 3, but I also just want to define a translation as a slide. So if you slide this quadrilateral from the left up, down, to the right, the size stays the same. So again, choice 3 is the answer there. Number 2 says the diameter of a sphere is 12 inches. What is the volume of the sphere to the nearest cubic inch? So if you look at your reference sheet, volume of a sphere is defined as 4/3 pi r cubed. Again, this is on the reference sheet. Notice that the only thing we need to plug in here is the radius, but unfortunately we're given the diameter. If you think about a circle, the diameter goes all the way across through the center. And that means that the radius is just half of it. So if the diameter is 12, d equals 12, then r must be 6, half of it. So we're just going to plug in. We have 4/3 pi times 3 to the 6th power, or 6 to the 3rd power. And what you can do is very carefully type this into your calculator. Make sure that the 4/3 goes inside of parentheses. Make sure that the 6 goes inside of parentheses before you cube it, and you should be all set to get the correct answer. So take a second to type that in your calculator, pause the video if you need to do so, and then check back in with me to see if you get the correct answer. So when I typed it in, I got 904.779, and then that rounds to the nearest cubic inch, meaning a whole number, to 905. Number 3 says a right rectangular prism is shown on the diagram below. Which segments are coplanar? Now this is a word that just means that they're on the same plane. A plane is just a surface that technically extends infinitely, but we often see it represented by like rectangles or pieces of paper or walls or floors. All of those are planes. And so here we're looking for the one pair of segments that are coplanar, on the same plane. So I'm just going to go through and highlight, and then I'll erase. If it's not the answer, then I'll highlight again and erase, and you should go through the same motions on your paper. So here it says that EF and BC are what we're looking for. Now you can see here that EF is on this front plane. It's also on the back plane, or the top plane here, but it's not on this side plane, which is where BC is located. So number 1 is actually not our choice. And then I'm just going to erase and look at choice 2. HD and FG. So this is a similar case. HD can either be on this plane here or this plane in the back, but FG is only on this side plane or the top plane. So we have no coplanar segments in that particular question, or in that particular choice. So that's not our choice. Next we have GH and FB. Same type of things happening. In each of these cases, we end up with these things that are called skew lines. They are not parallel, they are not perpendicular, and they're not on the same plane, ever. They're never going to touch each other. So again, HGFB, they are both skew. So hopefully choice 4 is the correct answer. EA and GC. Now you might say, what? Those are not on the same plane. They're so far apart, they're not touching, they're never going to touch. But actually, we could draw a plane going through here that would contain both of them. If you were to think about sticking a piece of paper into this rectangle, that piece of paper could touch one corner and go all the way to the other corner, meaning the edges here. And so that piece of paper would contain both EA and GC when you stick it in here and you go across the diagonal of that rectangle, essentially, or across the diagonal of this prism. So again, our choice here is 4. On this first page, we have our answers as 3, 3, and 4. Number 4 says, what are the coordinates of the image of point A, 2, -7, under the translation xy maps on to x minus 3, y plus 5. So translation, again, is just a slide. And if we're mapping xy, the original coordinates, onto x minus 3 and y plus 5, that just means subtract 3 from x's and add 5 to the y's to get your new coordinates. 2 take away 3 is -1. -7 plus 5 more is -2. So we end up with choice 1. Number 5 says point M is the midpoint of AB. Whenever I see stuff like this and there's no picture, I always love to draw it. AB is a segment with point M in the middle. And we represent midpoint by showing these little hash marks because a midpoint would divide this segment into 2 equal parts. The coordinates of M are 2, 8, and the coordinates of A are 10, 12. What are the coordinates of B? So what we have to think about is how do we get from A to M, and how would we then go from M to B? Well, whatever we do to get from A to M, we should do the same thing to get from M to B. So we're going to look at the x coordinates first. 10 to 2 means that we're subtracting 8. So I should do the same exact thing over here. 2 take away 8 is -6. Now for the y's, we should also figure out the rule. I'm going from 12 to 8, so that looks like we're taking away 4. Whatever we do to get to M, we should do the same thing to get to B. Take away 4 more. Which means that we now have 8 take away 4 to give us 4. So point B is located at -6, 4, which is choice 2. Number 6 says, in the diagram below, QM is an altitude of right triangle PQR. PM is 8 and RM is 18. What is the length of QM? So I'm going to label QM with an X, and I'm actually going to demonstrate that down here at the bottom. I like to box in what I'm looking for and then also box in what I'm calling it. So that way it's nice and easy for me to figure out my final answer. When we see pictures like this with a bunch of right triangles set inside of each other, we need to think of 3 formulas. Hall, HA equals LL. Ass, A squared equals SS. And leash, L squared equals SH. Where H is your hypotenuse of the big triangle. You're always focused on the big triangle. I'm going to write that big up here. Focus on big right triangle. Because if you don't, then you're going to label the sides wrong and then you're going to get the answer wrong. Let's see. A is the altitude. L is the leg, or legs, I should say. And S stands for segment. Now the hypotenuse is what gets split up into segments. So what we like to do is go through and label on the diagram what we're given as H, A, L, and S, and also what we're looking for as either H, A, L, or S. So here, they already told me that QM is the altitude, which means that this should get labeled with an A. Now, if I think of my big, huge, gigantic right triangle, the right angle's up here, which means that this whole entire piece is an H. Remember that H gets split up into two segments, S1 and S2. Now, there's not a formula that relates all of them, HASS. HASS is not a formula. However, part of that, A squared equals SS, is where we have an altitude, a segment, and a segment. So what we're going to do is plug into A squared equals SS. These are technically S1, S2. So you want to use two different segments here. So we have x squared, because altitude is x, equals 8 times 18. So now we have x squared equals 144. And in order to undo the square, we have to square root. So now we get x equals 12. And remember, because I called QMX, my final answer is choice 3, 12. Number 7 says, what is an equation of the line that passes through the point 2, 4 and is perpendicular to the line whose equation is 3y equals 6x plus 3? So perpendicular immediately tells you that you need opposite reciprocal slopes. Opposite reciprocal slopes. Which means we have to flip and negate. Now, we do need to get this equation into y equals before we can determine what the slope is. So I'm going to take a second to get, lost my pen, to get this equation into y equals. So I'm going to first divide each and every single piece by 3. So now we have y equals 2x plus 1. I need to identify the slope here because we're working with slopes because we're trying to find a line that's perpendicular. So here's my slope, always with the linear term, the x. And so this is technically 2 over 1. And if I need to flip and negate it, then my perpendicular slope is going to be negative 1 over 2. Flip it upside down and negate it. So now I'm going to take my point, 2, 4, and my slope of negative 1 over 2, and plug them into the point slope formula. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So we're going to plug in. The only thing that does not get plugged in for are the y and the x. Everything else gets plugged in for. So we have y minus, I'm going to go back over here to my point and label it as x1, y1, so then it's easy for me to plug in. Y minus 4 equals negative 1/2, that was our slope, times x minus 2. Now, unfortunately, you'll see that none of these choices are equal to this given equation, or written exactly the same way. One of them is equivalent, though. So what we have to do is get it in y equals, because that's what it looks like all of our answer choices are in. So I'm going to first start by distributing this negative 1/2. So we have y minus 4 equals negative 1/2 x plus, because negative times negative gives us positive, 1/2 of 2 is just 1. And then my last and final step is to add the 4. So now we have y equals negative 1/2 x plus 5. Now this equation matches up with choice 1. So our answers for this page are the following. Number 4 is 1, 5 is 2, 6 is 3, and 7 is 1.